Hi everyone, my name is Rob and I am Lauren's partner and a kind of a co-founder of this channel, but I'm usually behind the scenes and I'm usually the one helping record the videos and doing the editing and stuff like that. But I thought that it would be helpful for me to kind of do a separate video talking about what the experience was like for me for Lauren's recent hospitalization. So something that we're going to do a little bit different for this video is that you're actually going to be able to see like behind the scenes of Lauren like while we're shooting this, so that there's the opportunity for her to react. And I also just kind of feel like that I want this to be more of a collaborative video, but also for everybody to know that like this isn't a video that I'm just doing, behind her back or anything like that. We've talked a lot about the things that I'm going to talk about in this video, but I also do want it to be, really open and honest. Okay, so in this video, I'm basically going to be covering kind of like what my perspective is like from being a partner and, being somebody who's supporting somebody who's going through an experience like this, and being the perspective of somebody who's trying to advocate for somebody who is going through a mental health crisis and kind of working their way through the hospital experience and mental health care system. So I think the first thing that I kind of want to bring up and just really corroborate in terms of Lauren's story is kind of roughly kind of like what led her to be hospitalized. And I think that in this case, it's mainly, I think, to do with like her going off her meds. But I think, what's worth looking at is kind of what the factors in her life that maybe led her to go off her meds. And, I know that like our healthcare system is very like med centric, having seen it kind of firsthand, that it's just like, it's basically just about meds. But I think that it's really worthwhile looking at like, well, what was it that made her go off her meds? And in this case, I think there was a lot of different kind of stressful factors. She had a weird work travel schedule, which kind of led her to have like a weird sleep schedule. We were dealing with like some relationship conflict. It was kind of a particularly stressful week in terms of taking care of our kids. There was like a birthday party. And then there was also the season change that was going on right now from summer to fall. And that she's previously kind of struggled with this time of year a few years ago. So I think that it was a variety of factors that kind of stressful factors that kind of precipitated it being this situation where she didn't want to take her meds, which is itself kind of a problem with this illness. What I do want to mention though is that kind of from the beginning of this situation, I didn't know that she had stopped taking her meds. I only found out that she stopped taking her meds when we were in the emergency room and she was talking with the resident psychiatrist there. So she was off her meds for about a week and a half before hospitalization. Okay, so talking about kind of the week before hospitalization, this was kind of a period where she was kind of downward spiraling. She wasn't well. She was kind of dealing with more of her like negative symptoms and a bit of depression. She was spending lots of time in bed. She was kind of having difficulty communicating with me. I could tell that she was really low. I could tell she wasn't doing well. One thing that she told me was that she was struggling with thoughts of suicide. And that's something that's difficult to hear. It's something that, is obviously really concerning. And, I don't think that I really knew how to deal with that. And I think that it caused problems. Me just not knowing how to deal with that and me wanting to support her, but not knowing how. And, I think that throughout this whole process, it's been really murky in terms of trying to sort out what is like relationship conflict and what is kind of just dealing with like the symptoms and the illness and stuff like that. And so it was really challenging throughout that week to try to navigate figuring out how to best support her. And so I went to a therapy session with her therapist She had some time with her therapist, and then I went in with her therapist, and we kind of talked about, communication and trying to figure out, I guess, how to approach things that would be best for her. And it was hard because when I hear something like she is feeling suicidal, I feel like it's the worst. We need to go to the hospital right now. Like that's kind of where I'm coming from. But at the same time, like, and what was kind of conveyed in that therapy session was like, well, that's just her like communicating like kind of what, like how she's feeling, but she just needs to communicate that, but it's not like something she's going to act on. But at the same time, when we were in that therapy session, the therapist was like, well, let's draw a scale, and, on one end of the scale, it'll be, this is time to go to the hospital, and the other's, I don't know, not going to the hospital. Where are you on that scale? And she put like a couple notches below going to the hospital. So it's like, even though it wasn't this situation where she, wanted to go to the hospital right away, things weren't good. And, she's also previously told me that she'll never want to go to the hospital willingly. She won't go. And so, dealing with that information where like she's telling me that she's struggling with thoughts of suicide, and she's identifying, she's close to needing to go to the hospital, and that she doesn't ever want to go to the hospital, never go willingly. So kind of dealing with all of that information, the rest of the week resumed. And this was on, I don't know, this was early in the week on like a Tuesday or something. And the rest of the week, it was kind of still deteriorating, like from there, just, feeling low and spending a lot of time in bed, and more relationship or interpersonal conflict between the two of us trying to work through this. And then we kind of get to the end of the week, and there's my daughter's birthday party, and she's struggling a lot, and we have to leave the birthday party early. And on the way home from the birthday party, she said that maybe we'll go to the hospital tomorrow. I can't remember exactly like how you brought it up, but it was like, maybe we'll go to the hospital tomorrow.
You had asked me, and then I was like, well, maybe tomorrow. Like, yeah.
So, that felt like a red flag to me, in terms of like, if she said that she never wants to go to the hospital, and now she's saying, well, maybe you go to the hospital, like it must be really bad. The next morning, Monday morning, so Monday is the day that she went to the hospital. She missed her therapy appointment in the morning, and I tried everything that I could to get her to go to this appointment, but she didn't want to go. I called her therapist and kind of explained what was going on, and that I was concerned. And he tried to call her, he tried to email her, but like there was no communication from her. She spent most of the day in bed, and then in the late afternoon, she got up and she like started to have a shower and started to get ready. And I kind of thought maybe she was going to go somewhere. And when I had talked with her therapist earlier in the day, he was kind of like, are you going to be home? Are you going to be with her? And I said that I was. And so I was worried about her kind of going off and being on her own, given that things had been deteriorating all week, and that, she felt like she needed to go to the hospital earlier in the week, and things were far worse now. And she'd already talked about maybe needing to go to the hospital the day before. So I thought things were, not great. And, the idea of her just like leaving the house didn't seem like a good idea to me. So I hid her car keys.
Not cool.
When she finished getting ready and she tried to leave and she realized her car keys were missing, that's when things got a lot worse. I couldn't really reason with her about trying to arrange alternative transportation. Like I was trying to say, like, I'll take you anywhere you want to go. Your friends can come and get you. If you don't want to be in the house or you don't want to be around me, like we can work something out so that we know that you're safe right now. But she wasn't having any of it. She didn't, all she wanted was her car keys, and she didn't want a babysitter. She just wanted to go. She was searching around the house for the keys, and I hadn't hidden them very well. And I thought that she was going to just find them and she was going to just leave. So it was at that point that I called like a friend for backup. And when she got here, she parked her car in front of Lauren's car. So that, I don't know if that she didn't like that. And she didn't like that I had like called for support. So I think I kind of need to pause things a little bit and just say that like, I feel like at this point, Lauren was really not herself. Like she was furious, but she was also, you know, she was swearing at me and she was threatening me. And, I just knew that like this was, you know, this wasn't her, this was her illness. And so that's why I knew that I kind of needed support and backup. Shortly after our friend arrived, you know, the argument kind of reached a peak and Lauren ran out of the house. And she literally ran out of the house and ran down the street. And we haven't talked about this a lot, but she runs ultra marathons. So, you know, the thought of Lauren running away from you is not a good one because she'll probably be able to run a lot farther than you. But I got a bike. And then you know, our friend chased her as far as she could, which was good because I needed to know which direction it went. But I just got a bike and then I rode around the neighborhood just slowly following her. And eventually she made her way back home. And when she did make her way back home, she tried to run into the house and then lock me out of the house. But I was like right behind her. And then she tried to run through the house and out the back door and then jump over the fence. But I was able to like jump on top of the fence. And so I wasn't pulling her off the fence or anything. I was just on the fence with her. And then she ran back to the house, again, tried to lock me out. And then she went upstairs and she locked herself in our bedroom. So it was good. She was back home. But I felt like at this point, like we needed help, and we called crisis services, but they were unavailable. So we called 911 and police came. And I want to talk a little bit about the decision to call 911 because I think that it was something that was really, really difficult to do. I wanted very much to believe that we weren't going to need to go to the hospital and that we didn't need to involve like the police in terms of getting her medical help like that. I know firsthand how traumatizing the experience has been for her in the past with respect to police and with respect to the hospital. And so I know how much of a fear she has about going to the hospital and what the hospital can be like. I didn't know what the hospital could be like firsthand, but I had a good idea just based on like what she's told me. And I know she didn't want to go. At the same time, like things had been getting worse kind of on a daily basis, and combined with, you know, what we had talked about in her therapy session earlier in the week in terms of her feeling like she was just a couple notches down from going to the hospital. Then earlier in the week, then things had gotten far worse. And then, you know, also her own admission that like, maybe we should go to the hospital today when she's previously said that she'll never go to the hospital. You know, I had an idea that things were really bad. And then with what just had happened, like running out of the house, I didn't think that things were going to get any better without going to the hospital. On top of this, like, you know, I was still under the impression the whole time that she had been taking her meds. And I didn't know that she hadn't been taking her meds at this point. Otherwise, I think I would have, it would have been easier, I think, for us to deal with trying to convince her to go to the hospital and maybe getting intervention earlier, but I'm not sure. So the police came and I was able to talk with them beforehand a little bit, just to give them like a background in terms of like what her experience was like with police officers beforehand and my concerns about that, and for them to be, you know, really considerate. And it was a male police officer and a female police officer. Lauren had locked herself in our room and she was just holding onto the door so that people couldn't get in. And the police officers were able to kind of just, you know, open the door. And then, you know, she was kind of like hysterical at that point in terms of probably being really afraid and probably being really mad and, upset.
Yeah, I was really afraid. It was more like being scared of like not really knowing who to trust and not really being able to like properly take in what was going on.
Yeah. And, I think that experience for her was really overwhelming because, the police, opened the door and then both police officers went in and I went in and the two friends that we had there, they both went in and, somebody was trying to console you, but it was just an overwhelming experience for everybody. So the female police officer really quickly identified Lauren because Lauren had come to her recruits class and Lauren had given a presentation about her experience. And this police officer remembered Lauren. And I think that was it was such an amazing connection, right off the bat, to know that okay, this police officer knows her story and, that's going to be really helpful in terms of how she approaches this situation. The male police officer I don't think he was in that recruits class, or I didn't know. And, definitely took more of a tough guy approach to things. To be fair about this whole police officer situation, Lauren was able to come downstairs. She was relatively calm, but I'd still say quite paranoid. And she was sitting in a chair and the police officers wanted to go. They wanted to just, they were suggesting just go upstairs, rest or, watch a movie with your friends and try to just calm down from this. And they wanted to go. And then, one of the male police officer handed me his phone and to talk to their mental health care team. And I was on the phone with this mental health care team, and I guess, so I wasn't present when this was happening, but I guess Lauren wanted to go on the deck in the backyard. And so she went on the deck in the backyard, and then I think she tried to jump over the fence again. And that's when the male police officer kind of pulled her inside and threw her into the couch. And, that wasn't helpful for her. And I think we were close to not having to go to the hospital maybe. But after talking to the mental health care team and them hearing me explaining the situation, and then also, the police officer's decision, I think after that incident of her trying to get away again, that's when they decided that they were going to bring her to the hospital. And she obviously didn't want to go, but again, the female police officer did a really great job of talking to you. And I can't remember which of our friends was also talking with you. And you also talked with me about, being scared. I think, I can't remember if there was much paranoia in terms of you feeling like I was with the police officers or something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember super clearly, but yeah, I was definitely paranoid about your involvement in it. But at one point, after talking with the female police officer, I asked to speak with you. And then I kind of leveled with you about what I was feeling, and yeah.
So long story short, we all were able to convince her to go to the hospital, and a friend was able to ride with her in the police cruiser to the hospital. So that was, I think, the best possible, well, it's not the best possible experience, but it was a relatively good experience in terms of getting to the hospital safely.
Yeah, and they didn't handcuff me, which was nice, because usually they do. So that was cool.
So they took her to our University of Alberta University of Alberta emergency room, which has an emergency room psych ward. And they immediately wanted to put her into a secure room, which she was not cool with because the last time she was there, they tied her down and they forcibly injected her. So that's kind of, that makes sense why she didn't want to be in there. So she was able to convince them, or they were able to just let her be in one of those curtained off rooms. In this room, I would say she was pretty clearly psychotic. She only stood the entire time, basically, for hours. She just stood with her purse on. She didn't want to sit down. She didn't want to take her purse off. It was it mattered where people were standing in this curtained room, like, because maybe she wanted easy access to get away. She stood staring at the curtains for a really long time, just like a foot away from the curtains, just staring directly at the curtains. She was transfixed with some fixture that was near the ceiling. She spent a significant amount of time just trying to overhear what the nurses were saying. It was during this time that a resident psychiatrist came in who was really wonderful. Like, she took the time to like build trust with Lauren while she was in this psychotic state. And she spoke really calmly, and she was very caring. And she basically did like an intake assessment. It was during this assessment that I first learned that Lauren had in fact stopped taking her meds about a week and a half earlier. And Lauren also mentioned that she felt like things were getting worse. And she mentioned that she was having difficulty with perception. Like, for example, I think the curtains were moving. The psychiatrist recommended a dose of fast-acting antipsychotic medication. And through a heroic effort of trying to convince her by the psychiatrist and by myself, she eventually did take this medication, which I think helped, and also helped like you sleep and stuff like that. So up until that point, we hadn't really needed to deal with the psych nurses. It had mainly actually just been waiting in the room for the doctors. But now that she had taken her meds, it was like immediately like power struggle turned on with the psych nurses. And it really never stopped her entire time that she was in the U of A psych ER ward. And it started off with this aggressive male nurse who had wanted to put her in the secure room to begin with. Right after she took her medication, being like, "Oh, I'm going to need to leave because visiting hours are over." And, that was a really frustrating experience. If the nurses had been present at all, they would have understood, like, the state that she was in, that she needed support right then, as soon as Lauren heard the nurse say that, she just immediately like left the room and threatened to leave. And I had to pull this nurse aside and just say, like, if you need to talk to me about that, like, we can go talk about this privately. And we did talk about it privately, and and then I was able to talk to like the psychiatrist we just managed to get her to take her meds and build trust that way. And, the psychiatrist was able to sort of coordinate with the psych nurses. But the psychiatrist basically said that, like, in terms of patient care, like, we defer to the psych nurses. So there's kind of an unbelievable amount of power that the psych nurses have over patients in the ward. And the deal that this psych nurse made with me was that I could stay, but we needed to go to the secure room. So, Lauren has wanted to stay out of the secure room because of like how traumatizing her experience was before. Instead, we're put into the secure room, and the secure room is just, cinder block walls and a metal bed, and that's it. It's horrifying, and it's not surprising why it would be traumatizing. And that's the room that they expected her to sleep in. But anyways, at least I would be there with her, and she wasn't happy about being in this room. She spent most of her time just basically standing right at the edge of the doorway, staring at the nurse's station. And she did that, and still standing because she hadn't sat down for, hours and hours. And then I think eventually the medicine kicked in, and then she actually did lay down and she got a bunch of sleep. The next morning, she met the actual psychiatrist for the day. It was just a resident psychiatrist before. She met her psychiatrist for the day, and it was kind of at that point, just based on, everything that had happened, the psychiatrist admitted her. And so then it was just a process of waiting for a bed to become available at some hospital in Edmonton. Lauren was understandably not happy about being admitted, and she walked away from the secure room. And the nurses took incredible offense to this, apparently, it's tough because I don't think, I understand why she didn't want to be in that room. And I understand why she was walking away from the room, why she didn't, like, she was trying to get away from the room, but I think she could have been talked down and moved back into the room, but that is not the way the nurses handled that situation. Instead, they called security and they all went in there and they basically dragged her back into the room. And, I was terrified that they were going to strap her down and that they were going to, like, be forcibly injecting her again. And it would be like the traumatizing experience that we were trying so hard to avoid. Luckily, they just locked her in the room, but that was not great. It was horrible. It didn't need to happen. There could have been an attempt at communication and there really wasn't. There was just this immediately, like, we're going to, like, be aggressive about it. So after they locked her in the room, they wouldn't let anybody into the room to just support her, because they said they wouldn't lock anybody in the room because of you could be a danger to them, and so they wouldn't let anybody into the room until she, like, took meds, which, like, she did take meds, and it was actually quite helpful in terms of, like, I mean, you needed it at that point in terms of, like, how you were hyperventilating and, like, you were somewhat hysterical.
Yeah, but I think it would have been a lot smoother of a process if they had let you in to explain that to me rather than taking a really staunch, stark approach to...
Well, and it's also, like, what is it, like, blackmailing you or into taking your meds, essentially?
Yeah, they wouldn't let anybody in until I took the meds and calmed down.
So that was such an unfortunate approach to dealing with that situation and trying to get a patient to take meds, is, like, pushing them into a situation where the situation's worse and then, like, kind of forcing them to take meds to get out of it. It's pretty despicable. So, this being my first, like, hospital experience like this, I definitely, it was eye-opening. It wasn't out of line from what how Lauren had described the experiences before. And I feel like if I hadn't been there, basically just being a witness, that things would have been a lot worse. I think what it is just that these psych nurses are extremely cynical about their jobs, and that their jobs have just completely wore down on them, and they really don't see the people they're treating as people who require, like, compassionate care, especially in an area like mental health, where what you're treating is a person's mind.
I think it's important to, like, note that not all of them are like that.
Okay.
But that it is very impossible for the job to wear on a person and to create that level of cynicism and that level of jadedness when
and, like, some of the nurses were better than other nurses. For sure, there were some that were better than others, but overall, the bar of care was so low. Or they all could have done such a better job, and some of them shouldn't have had that job at all. And so it was really disappointing. I stayed with Lauren, most of that day until dinner time, and then her friends came in and spent the evening with her. And, like, at this point, I had been awake for, like, 36 hours, and I went home and I slept for a bit, and I was back at the hospital by, like, 5:45 the next morning. Her friends, they weren't allowed in the room with her overnight, but luckily Lauren had her phone, so that was kind of good. Like, she could contact me, or she could contact her friends if she needed something or she needed help or whatever. And but her friends were there in the emergency room with her in the emergency room overnight. And then in the morning when I got there, I talked to her nurse, and her nurse was like, you can't go in until visiting hours, which is 9 a.m. So I just waited in the emergency room. And then this is again where, like, more power struggle happens. Like, I don't understand why it wasn't a situation where they understood that, like, a person going through a mental health crisis, you know, it's helpful for them to like have somebody there who's supporting them, who they can talk to, who can just be a presence with them, even if it's just me sitting in the room while she's sleeping. But like they didn't want me there. And at 9 o'clock when I tried to go in, they wouldn't. You know, security went and told them that I was there. They said that the nurses were doing rounds or something. There was some excuse. I waited for another half an hour. Security went in again to tell them that I was there, and still nothing. And then I called the psych ER ward and told them that I was there, and they said that she was sleeping, and I know she wasn't sleeping because I was texting with her. So I told them that, and I eventually was able to go in after that. But it was like, I don't understand why there was like such a power struggle with the nurses, and it was really frustrating from a support perspective. So at this point, you know, Lauren was admitted. She's just waiting for a bed. She's already spent like 2 nights now in the hospital. She started to have visitors more, which is great. She's starting to stabilize more. The meds that they've given her like are taking effect. She's also taking her regular medication. So, and she, you know, the entire time she wants to get out of there, but she's admitted. And so she's waiting for a bed, and eventually a bed does open up, and she kind of she needs to be transferred to this other hospital, and her previous experience of being, you know, put in an ambulance where they like unnecessarily blindfolded her. So she's terrified to go on an ambulance ride. But luckily I was able to ride with her in the ambulance, and she had some more tranquilizers, which really helped kind of smooth over the whole experience of being in the ambulance and then having to also go to this other hospital. The hospital that she went to, Alberta Hospital, is this really old hospital. I think I looked up, it's like the building she was in is like 50 years old. She had to go to the washroom in one room, and then she had to go wash her hands in another room because things were broken like throughout. And this is just like throughout the hospital. And, you know, I get that there's not like a huge budget for mental health, and it kind of shows just in terms of like where of the building. But the staff there were like a lot there. It didn't seem like there was that power struggle that was going on with the ER nurses there. The staff at this hospital like genuinely seemed like they cared about the patients, and they cared about their jobs, and they cared about being a good human being. The psychiatrist that she had there was also, you know, really positive, and, you know, wanted to approach her care in a lot more of a collaborative way. And she gave Lauren like day passes so that she could like come home and shower. She hadn't showered in like I don't even know, like a 5 or 6 day, 4 days, 3 days, and you know, get more clothes. And I had been bringing her clothes, but she hadn't changed out of anything. So that was helpful for her to be able to like to leave the hospital, and there be that trust there. You know, like I think that you kind of need that. You need that in terms of like recovery. And, you know, I get that it's not always going to be like that situation for like every patient. It's going to always be different, but like you needed that trust. You needed trust with like your doctors and your care staff.
I really need that like collaborativeness in terms of receiving care. And I think that doctor did a really, really good job of working with me and working with us to like figure out what was going to be the best moving forward.
And you were already doing a lot better at that point because you had been taking your meds for like, you know, a few days now. So despite this hospital being better, you know, something that I haven't mentioned throughout kind of all of this is that with respect to being in the emergency room, there is no actual support there. Like all it is a place for them to give you meds, or for them to wait for you to take meds and comply. Like I feel like that was the case too. Wait for them to give you meds and meds kick in. There isn't like any like sort of like therapy or support groups or like anything like that. And then so we were a bit more hopeful, I think, that it would be more of a supportive environment at Alberta Hospital. And they're kind of maybe is a little bit like, you know, there's an occupational therapist and a dietitian, and there's supposed to be a psychologist, and there's supposed to be a social worker, and there's a rec therapist. The reality was that, you know, The rec therapist was never there. She never saw her social worker once. She had one appointment with an occupational therapist. There was no actual psychologist therapist. There was no peer support group. And it was a better environment, and it was a more open environment, and you could walk around and you weren't in a locked room. But like the reality of recovery there still wasn't as good as I think probably just being in the community. And it also felt like just like recovery is still something that kind of needs to be like self-directed and on your own, instead of like, having like a coordinated approach to your recovery beyond meds, because that's something that was a big focus at Alberta Hospital. Like you met with the pharmacist there, and the psychiatrist, the focus was on meds. And I get that that's like an important component of well-being for somebody who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and trying to figure out, the best med mix. But I do think that there should be there should be a more holistic approach to it. I don't think that there's a whole lot to say about the rest of the experience of the hospital. It went pretty smoothly. Lauren was taking her medication, and after meeting with her psychiatrist a couple times, she got a 2-day pass, and then she was eventually discharged. The discharge process was like totally hands off. Again, she didn't meet her social worker. There was no like, let's coordinate with your care staff outside of this, and look at like, is there anything necessary for reintegration or anything like that? And maybe it was because I was there, with you most of the time, and they knew that you had external supports. But I still think that there's a requisite level of care and just procedure that's missing in terms of, how situations like this are handled. Okay, I've talked a lot about what basically happened and, what the sequence of events. But what I haven't talked a whole lot about, I think, is like what this whole experience has been like for me. Trying to balance Lauren in a downward spiral with also trying to balance, keeping up with life and kids and work it was pretty much impossible. I hope that like moving forward, and it's something I think that we need to work on like in therapy is figuring out how to better handle like things like this in the future, and approach things more sustainably. But this time it was really difficult. I think something that I never really expected is how adversarial our relationship became in terms of me trying to support her going through something like this. And it was really difficult because, I could see that things were getting worse, but I didn't really know how to best support her. And I think there's also an element of this, I think, in terms of like her not trusting me. And then on more extreme levels, delusions of her thinking that I'm involved with like the police or with doctors, that makes it more of an adversarial support relationship, which, at least I would feel it's easier to support somebody when they are actively wanting you to support them. But when you're supporting somebody or trying to support somebody and they don't want you to support them, that's really hard. It's really hard to deal with. It's really hard to deal with because I think there's constantly this feeling of being rejected, and trying not to take that personally, and trying to separate what is kind of relationship type conflict from what is like illness type conflict is so messy. And there was a lot of times throughout this that I felt really lost, and I felt really hurt, and I just felt really uncertain about like how to best support her. And I don't feel like I did the best job of supporting her. I think another thing I just never expected to feel like working through trying to support her was just feeling unloved and having doubts about, you know, our relationship. When I found out that she hadn't been taking her meds, it was this kind of big mix of feelings. First of all, just kind of feeling like relieved that like there was a reason why all of this was happening, but also feeling like conflicted because I understand why like her not wanting to take her meds is kind of part of her illness. But at the same time, still feeling a bit betrayed by it, by not knowing and by her like hiding it. Overall, the experience of, you know, leading up to hospitalization and then hospitalization and also post-hospitalization, it was a lot more difficult than I really could have ever imagined. And I think that I really underestimated the challenge that it could be in terms of supporting somebody going through a mental health crisis like this. I want to end this video with some advice or thoughts for caregivers or, you know, people who are supporting people with schizophrenia who are going through like a similar mental health crisis or hospitalization. First, I guess I'll mention is just not to give up hope, because you know, the situation that you're in isn't going to be like that forever. You know, things are going to get better, and I think you just have to believe that. I think another important thing that people kept telling me, at least, is just to make sure that you take care of yourself, because you're not really going to be able to take care of other people if you're falling apart. And I've heard people say that before, but it's such a tough balance to strike when, you know, you want to be there supporting your loved one, but at the same time, like, you still need to sleep and you still need to eat, and you're just going to get sick or you're going to fall apart if you don't. Something that I learned more about with this experience was the role of being an advocate. People who are in the mental health care system are a vulnerable population. And I do think that, especially like witnessing kind of the like power dynamic with the nurses, and also like hearing Lauren's previous experiences in the hospital, I know that like it's a situation where like it's very helpful to have an advocate, somebody who can be there for you, who can, where possible, I guess, you know, be in doctors' meetings with you. And that's not going to be possible for, you know, for every situation in terms of you supporting somebody. But I think that it was helpful for her in this situation, especially in instances where like she was on medication and, you know, she wasn't remembering things very well, and she was extremely drowsy. Like, there was appointments that she just didn't remember at all, like days blended in together. And so I think that it was helpful for me to be there in terms of in terms of talking with the nurses with her, in terms of talking with the doctor with her, in terms of asking questions and finding out and getting updates and finding out what's going on and what's going to happen, and keeping track of things that way, and making sure that she was getting the best care that was possible for her there. And also, like, you know, facilitating communication between her and the nurses, because I think that like that was helpful sometimes, in terms of like, I just don't think that the nurses always maybe pay as much attention to requests that are made directly from patients because of them being mental health patients, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, like, when you're in an altered state, I guess I can understand why people would be less likely to take what I'm saying at face value, or to like value it as much. So like, I'm super grateful that you were there, and that you were there to advocate for me, and that you were there to like bolster my voice. And yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, continuing advice for caregivers. It's helpful to be in therapy yourself and to have a therapist yourself, because you're going to have stuff that you need to work through. If it's somebody who's close to you, like a partner, helpful to be in therapy with them. Lauren and I are in therapy right now. You know, develop a plan about how you're going to handle situations like this. We have talked about this in the future, but we didn't have like a firmly written out plan, and we still don't. It's just been so recent since we've gotten back from the hospital, but it is a priority for us to have a plan in place that addresses all of the things that we kind of had to go through in terms of decision-making process when we get to a state where it's like you're not in the best state to be making decisions.
I think that helps with, I guess, building trust, or like building a collaborative effort in terms of getting care. Like if it was something that you and I had agreed upon when I was in a clear state of mind, it would be a lot easier to be like, hey, Lauren, like this is what we agreed together. Like this is what you wanted.
Yeah.
And it would have been easier to like take those steps then if it was something that we had agreed upon before. So that is a priority for us to do.
Another thing that I would recommend is, building a support network of people who you can bring in to like, help you, and loved ones, friends. I feel really grateful for all the people in our lives who like stepped up and, offered their support and were there for us. So we were really lucky there. In terms of dealing with nursing staff, I would say like understanding that power dynamic that exists in terms of them just like wanting to like, exercise their power. But I think like you still have to deal with them like as patiently and as calmly as possible, but at the same time still being like still being firm where necessary, and maybe above all just like showing that like you are present.
I think it also helped to like humanize me, that you were there and you were a person who cared about me, and you were I think that helped in that regard too.
Yeah, I feel, having seen how this all worked, I feel really bad for people who don't have somebody there for them, like advocating for them. And then I guess finally, like encouraging continuing recovery post-hospital. I think I definitely understand that like recovery doesn't just end at the hospital. And, ultimately, like I think what I took away from this whole experience is trying to get to a place where this doesn't really happen like this again. Being able to like identify stressors that, are more triggers in Lauren's life, and, working on the like relationship conflict and communication side of things, and having a plan, and, involving a support network more. And maybe, I guess, above all, and I think, Lauren mentioned this in her video, like, I think early intervention is really helpful. Like, I think her going to the hospital probably earlier than she would have if she was living on her own, because I was there to be like, this is not going well. If she had gone longer, then it would have taken her longer to get out of the hospital and recover in the hospital. And so I think early intervention is really important in terms of reducing the severity of crises like this. I hope that this helped give a really well-rounded and an honest look at what the experience was like supporting somebody while they're, through a mental health crisis and in the hospital, and, what that experience was really like. I hope that, I feel like I'm gonna catch a lot of flack from Lauren's loving audience in terms of how I approached the situation. And
go easy on him. He did his best, and I am so appreciative of it.
Anyways, we made it through it, and I'm really grateful, and I learned a ton, and I'm glad that we are on the mend. So anyways, thank you for watching what is probably going to be like the longest video ever on this channel. Thanks for watching. If you want to support the creation of future videos like this, make sure to check out our Patreon link in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day. Bye.